Howdy, and welcome back to the show. So this week I wanted to have a look at one of these 14 megapixel Panasonic Lumix cameras, shockproof, waterproof ones. I'm not expecting too many of the internal parts to be reusable, but I do want to take a look inside and see what I can get at. So that'll be this week's show. I haven't stopped on the Raspberry Pi Portable, but because my soldering iron died and a few other issues have got in the way, I haven't been able to finish the HDMI cable. Everything else is pretty much functioning in the system, yeah, I'll get the HDMI part sorted out, finish that off and cover that off on probably next week. And yeah, and a lot of lessons learned from this one. So yeah, a bit to talk about there. But for this week, let's take a look at a Lumix 14 megapixel waterproof, shockproof camera. Alrighty, a few screws on the side, couple on the bottom, and a couple more on this side. So I think we'll start with those and see how far that gets us. Okay, they're all of the obvious screws, and I do have a little bit of movement on this back panel. It does look like it will lever out. Yep, quite a bit of flexibility there. And what about from the top? So yep, it's just a snug fit, and that frame works free. And then we have a few more screws. So this looks like the front part's not too eager to let go, so it does look like we'll be going in through the back. Alrighty, so we've definitely got some more movement. One of the panels. Okay. What have we got here? So immediately from this back panel section, which contains the screen and some of the controls, we've got a couple of flat flex ribbon connectors going in through to the main board. So I'll disconnect those from the main board at this stage and then go in a bit further. Alright, so just on this controller LCD board, another one of those panels. So these are the very nice buttons, and probably about a 3-inch LCD roughly. A couple of flat flex ribbon connectors and a whole series of screws holding what I would say is the complete LCD assembly here and the controlling board into this case, and you can see the lovely little waterproof seal just on the inside there. Fairly firm, but it's a rubber. Alright, so I'm actually going to take this out of here. Okay, so that controller board there just comes straight out. Lovely little buttons, and again a nice big silicone type membrane under those buttons, assist with waterproofing. So there's the controlling board. Alrighty, so that is a sealed glass panel, not removable from the actual casing, and you would expect that, otherwise you get water ingress. So that's one of the backing plates, and there is our little LCD. lovely little LCD panel. Whether that's reusable or not will require some investigation. Probably looks like around about a 30 pin, but if it's yeah, I'll need to have a look at a lot more detail as to how I would potentially drive that, if that's reusable in any way. Anyway, that's the LCD. Alright, let's keep going with the internals of the camera. It's still fairly rigid at this stage, so I dare say we've still got some layers to go through before it'll let go completely. And so, yep, we will continue to take out screws. Okay, just get rid of some of the screws. That plate, separating plate, maybe some form of the structure, it's fairly rigid, and protecting some of the components as well. And yep, a couple more screws in here, but at this stage the board's quite loose. No, not quite letting go yet. Alright, so we've got probably like a riser board sitting in there, and this is connected to the main board down here via this little flat flex. A couple more flat flex connecting other bits and pieces. So it's on its way out, but not completely letting go yet. Alright, so I don't know whether that'll come through clearly or not. There's actually 3 Phillips head screws holding the riser to the frame at the top here, coming in from underneath, so I'll get those out. There's also another one down here that haven't been removed yet. I might disconnect these flat flex, see if that gives us any more freedom. Okay, there comes the complete camera module. So it does come out as a module. Quite a bit going on in there, and we will definitely have a closer look at that in a second. Alright, I dare say there is our capacitor, more than likely. It wouldn't be a rechargeable battery for internal clock and memory and things like that. It seems a little large for that, and it's obviously not the main battery that drives the unit, because that's there's a battery casing in here. It takes a standard 3.7 volt lithium battery. So this looks like a cap, possibly to drive the flash. Yep, so we'll have a look at that in a moment. A few more screws, a little bit of wiring, not as neat as you would possibly expect, but anyway. Let's keep going. Alright, we have a little 2-cable connector here. Possibly some sort of switch or maybe a bit of power. That should be easily enough to disconnect. Yep, there we go. Okay, so once that flat flex is disconnected and the rest of the flat flex is disconnected, the board itself comes out. You can see the huge SD slot, and you can see the external peripheral connectors on the side there. I think one of those might be micro HDMI. So there's the main board, and we'll have a quick look at that in a bit more detail. just keep going into the camera body here. So we've got a battery compartment behind here, and that's part of the reason we've got so much bulk. So if we have a look at the battery compartment there, that's that cavity. It's realistically just protected by this block of plastic here, and this, which I believe to be a capacitor of sorts. Okay, and we've still got this board that is fairly well affixed into the top of the case with these buttons going through. Alright, let's see if we can go any further. Alright, I wasn't being very rough there, I just sort of gave this a little bit of leverage, and there's a clip on the bottom and one screw to remove in order to be able to get the cavity out, the battery and card compartment. Again, just with a little bit of leverage. Spring mounted part, that will probably be for the battery section there, just to be able to provide a little bit of spring to the battery as it comes out. It does look like a tiny little speaker. Big battery connector, so that's the power distribution board, as well as buttons and so on. It is still very, very firmly seated in there. I can see another screw down the bottom. That's definitely freed things up. And out comes the board. So there's the case. The rest is rigid and sealed. So sealed diffuser for the flash, sealed glass on the front of that, as you would expect, and that may come out, but at this stage, yes, okay, the top piece clicks off. A few more screws. You can actually detach the fascia plate by removing the rest of the screws. There's probably another one underneath here somewhere. So yep, I won't worry about going any further with that. There's one self-explanatory. Let's have a look at some of these parts. Alright, so the case parts there and there, covered those. So this is the LCD. Not a lot to see, and I'm going to do some homework on this one as to whether or not I can reuse it, so I'm not going to break it down any further. So yeah, just a basic LCD panel. This is the top board, the controlling board, where some of the buttons were. Again, little silicon pads, typical little dome buttons, capacitors and so on, surface mount parts as you would expect, little ribbon connector. That's where the main battery connected through to, providing power. You've got power distribution through here. Little LED of some description, possibly backlighting for the board, maybe not. And a couple of other small circuity parts, but the main focal point on this is a capacitor. So a 300 volt rated capacitor, and that would be for the flash. It actually says photo flash in there anyway, so that would be driving the flash. And it's mounted on its own little board just here. Possibly see a little bit of movement, but it means desoldering all of these wires. Don't want to do that today. But yep, there you go. That's the controlling board and a very large capacitor for the flash. So the actual, and we covered off on this one earlier, this was your little controller board. Not much to see on that one. So this is the brain, I guess. SD card, a couple of external connectors, series of standard components, all very, very, very small micro components. Do have a little lithium battery there. That would more than likely be the memory, clock memory. Yes, the clock battery to remember the time and other settings. And we have some rather small but hopefully visible packages. Right, I might just have a bo peep at those in a bit more detail and see whether or not I can figure out what they are. Yeah, so without going into too much more detail, just at the moment, this is the main Panasonic package that's doing all of the processing, I dare say. We've got some memory at the back here and a couple of other small assisting packages, maybe for audio. Just remembering that the cameras that you get these days, 14 megapixels, plus the fact that they do 1080p video and audio and a whole raft of other features. So yep, the main controlling board there. And the other main component, just the casing for battery holder, etc, etc. And the other main component, the one that looks like it can do with a bit more of a teardown, is the sensor and the controlling componentry for the sensor. So there are a few visible screws. So I think we can get in there a bit further. As you would expect, one of the last screws that you need to find, hidden behind a sticker. I've actually just torn that. So that particular ribbon cable in there is extremely delicate. That will be a very, very difficult and interesting repair. So what we've got here, this module, extremely well put together. I could probably still lever out some bits and pieces. But it's basically a housing for the electronic componentry, and this is a mirror. So, like a rejection TV, so to speak. So this is what was facing out the front of the camera, and this is a 45-degree mirror housing there on that 45-degree angle. Right, so obviously reflecting straight down through the body, coming out the bottom, more lenses and glass in order to be able to do different focusing and so on. So coming out the bottom there and into this assembly. And at the bottom of this assembly you can probably see, I believe that to be our sensor, and that's where all of these ribbon cables, flat flex connectors and etc. are heading in and out of this main assembly. So that will be a little tricky to see. We'll see what we can do. Okay, I dare say that is as close as we're going to get to this sensor. I'll just see what I can do for making this a bit clearer. So obviously a lot of little pixels. So ultimately, there you go. What was a nice put together 14 megapixel Panasonic camera before I got to it. But still very, very interesting stuff to have a look at how well these things are put together and how much stuff is actually in them. A credit to the people that design them and build them. They're pretty phenomenal. There's no wasted space. And I do have out of that at least possibly a couple of buttons and switches, other bits and pieces, little doors and things like that. and a LCD if I ever get a chance to reuse that one as well. But yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. A look inside a 14 megapixel Panasonic camera. And yeah, hopefully next week I will get to talking about this Raspberry Pi Portable and lessons learned from that. Thanks very much. So thanks very much for joining me and watching the show. Subscribers are always welcome, so feel free to subscribe, that would be great. And I hope you'll join me again next week.